Hello, everyone, and welcome to the Eng Lang Pro YouTube channel. My name is Abby. I am one of the tutors here at ELP. All of us tutors scored overall 46 or above, so all in the top 1%. And whether you are here aiming for that top 1%, maybe that 40 plus, 30 plus, or even if you just care about language, we are here to help. Today, we're going to go into identity. This is like our Unit 4 area of study to focus, and specifically looking at gender and how it impacts language. Now, gender is one of these 7 elements listed that impact language explicitly in the VCE English Language Study Design. So it's age, gender, sexuality, occupation, interests, aspirations, and education. They're explicitly listed that you want to be able to master. Now, gender is often quite a weak point because it's a lot more complex than just the lexical subsystem, right? So when we think of occupation, say, it's strongly linked to occupational jargon and slang. The factor of gender isn't necessarily so, but it can still be a super powerful element to discuss, even in your ACs and SAQs. Let's get into it. So before the meta language, just a few external factors is that we understand that gender is not binary, and many discussions about how gender impacts language are kind of general observations. Just like pretty much everything in VCE English language, we are making generalizations. They are important, but they are generalizations nonetheless. The second thing to quickly go into is the timeline about the theories of gender. So the characteristics associated with how each gender is spoken have usually been thought to be innate. And what I mean by this is, those kind of stereotypes like women naturally apologize more and they swear less and they're more talkative. People believed that these were innate characteristics. But recently, some linguists are challenging this idea. And the main cause for difference in language use between male and female speakers is now starting to be discussed by linguists as a result of societal conditioning. This is really important, especially as we're thinking of in English language being this tool that we kind of deliberately and intentionally use to reflect elements of our identity, and it is modified frequently. Linguist studies show that the language associated with gender is also modified, but somewhat more subconsciously to reflect identities of an individual. A few more of the ideas before we get into the nitty-gritty meta-language to be aware of are 2 main linguists that I want to touch on. These are names that I'd like you to be aware of, VCE English Language. Robin Lakoff and Jennifer Coates. Robin Lakoff in the 1970s, particularly 1975, published Language and Woman's Place. She was kind of one of the first linguists that actually drew, guys, we should potentially think about gender as an important area in sociolinguistics. This was followed up, of course, many studies in between, but another hallmark example is Language and Gender in 1998, with the main characterization that women's speech style is cooperative and men's is competitive. Now, this is very, very broad, kind of getting back to our pinpoint from before, that a lot of this is generalizations, but it has found that even from the 20, 30 years from which it was first published to be quite relevant and quite true in contemporary Australian society. What this means from a broad stance is that Coates argues that women's speech styles typically have a less dominant speaker, and the goal in speech is to emphasize support and solidarity, not necessarily power. One of the key elements that she used to rely on this is this idea that gossip isn't necessarily just quote unquote bitching or talking behind people's backs. As a matter of fact, it's actually a way to reinforce shared perceptions, with a lot of linguists taking the descriptive approach that gossip can be valuable in supporting this in-group solidarity, in-group identity, etc., etc. Now let's move on to the features that you actually need to know in creating an analysis in your ACs, in your SAQs, in your essays. One of the first things to bear in mind is that it's often thought that tag questions are more important or more frequently utilized by the female gender. For example, that was a fun day, wasn't it? What we get when a tag question occurs deep down is this encouragement of the floor to be shared. If I say, oh, wasn't it? Don't you think? Really, I'm saying, hey, tell me your opinion, take up the floor. It's been hypothesized that by a lot of linguists, tag questions are more predominantly used by female speakers, with reinforcing this idea that women's speech style tends to be more towards the cooperative. Similarly, and quite similar to tag questions, is hedging. Now, it's been thought to do multiple things. Firstly, it demonstrates uncertainty. As speakers, these speakers don't necessarily want to show that they fully know everything. They're kind of trying to adhere to the tall poppy syndrome and potentially others' positive and negative face needs. For example, could you please try a little bit harder, just in the sense of. Now, of course, what is at the crux of this sentence is try harder, right? Now, we're sort of watering it down by making it this kind of ask with a lot of hedging of and please and but it's essentially thought of as this indirect way of trying to adhere to face needs, more commonly implemented by the female gender. Very, very similarly is declaratives that are used to prompt action in someone else when an imperative could be used. For example, in your family household, say it's cold, you might say, hey, can you turn on the heater? What a female speaker may be more inclined to do than a male speaker when there is a broad social distance present is to actually, instead of using imperative like turn on the heater, they might say something that implies they want the action to be done in the form of a declarative. It's a bit chilly in here. Now, what actually happens when someone says it's a bit chilly in here isn't just, a discussion about how it's cold in this hypothetical example. Really, it's someone trying to indirectly ask, and so reduce an imposition on negative face needs, the turning on of the heater. This is more common and thought of by linguists to be more common to the female gender. The final one and a half, is empty adjectives. This is essentially things that you cannot qualify in a physical attribute. For example, a lecture hall can be small, but the lecture itself, if someone says the lecture was divine, it's like, well, what does that necessarily mean? A lot of the time we use it to qualify foods, such as that cake was heavenly. These empty adjectives were often thought of to be used more frequently than male speakers by female speakers. The final one to be aware of, potentially moving into the more sociology side, is a tendency to over-apologize. This one is probably the final element that is showing the age of a lot of the key linguistic ideas and elements in the VCE English Language Study Design, being 1998. A tendency to over-apologize is a final theme to be aware of, but is slowly being far and far less of a specific hallmark of someone's gender. Now that we've had a look at the list in which most predominantly is seen in female genders, I want us to go to the inverse, right, of more male genders or masculine speakers. So, a short thing to run through is that with this idea of women's speech style being cooperative and men's being competitive, it means that in a group there may be one dominant speaker. What you might be looking for in your AC transcript is less sharing of the floor, other speakers taking a supportive role in the discourse, etc., etc. This also means then that turn taking might not really be explicitly initiated. So where we had tag questions before, like it was a fun day, wasn't it? We might just have, it's a fun day, or the movie was good. Others in the group are still signaled to talk/respond, but there isn't necessarily an explicit signal. It's picked up just from the knowledge that one speaker has said their opinion and, okay, I feel like talking, so I'm going to talk. Now, is this a mass generalization? Yes. Is it also linguistically backed to some extent and important in the concept of, for VCE English Language, they definitely want us to understand and know of some of the general implications of male and female speech? Definitely. This also means that I want you to keep your eyes out when looking for contemporary examples. Or, if you're watching this the night before the exam, for your stimulus or for examples that you have already used. See if any of these ring true, and then it can be an extra discussion point on top of things such as in-group, out-group, register, politeness. A few of the final elements is that there's less hedging expressions, like we need to work harder, instead of just maybe a little bit harder, please, we just get we need to work harder. The final one, and this is also sort of arranged in prevalence to contemporary male and female speakers, is that expletives may be viewed as more acceptable. Now, further linguistic studies are starting to show a shift that gender is dictating a bit less the use of expletives. But there is still a claim to be made that in an occupational environment that predominantly has male workers, right? So like say trade workers, tradies, the use of expletives may be more acceptable. And potentially this reflects not just the style of work being used or the mode of speaking, but it does also potentially reflect that more male speakers are in that profession. And historically, expletives, swearing, and profanities are being used more frequently by male speakers and almost seen as kind of less taboo to be used. Quite taboo, quite historically, to think of like quote unquote, a woman may not swear, whereas you don't necessarily have such quoting occurring. Now, of course, a lot of this is telling and showing age. And if you're finding this video 10 years in the future, perhaps you might even disagree with more of these. What VCE English Language really wants us to do is just be aware of them and then kind of pepper this acknowledgement and analysis into our discussions, like this may reflect the identity. For example, for your SAQs and ACs, you can use it as an identity feature. So if you're given a transcript with female speakers, potentially, especially with an informal register, their mannerisms, maybe hedging, tag questions, can be great to discuss in an AC. So usually hedge words when you write, such as, this typically reflects a female speaker. This may generally reflect the identity of. This may reflect. This use of hedging can be really important in just keeping an objective analysis for your transcript. We never want to impose exactly what something may mean and get it wrong. We want to just highlight objectively that this is more commonly spoken by one gender or the other. Just like we might say that someone's purpose is potentially something, but bearing in mind that there's multiple. For essays, where we're kind of being tasked with a bit of a broader perception, a broader view, gender as a whole can be super important to discuss. I've personally based whole paragraphs around this, and it's almost more important to do this in your essays than your SAQs. So build half, a full paragraph, use your contemporary examples. And what's really great is that this is very pertinent to register. For example, we have our expletives, our hedging, our swearing, our positive and negative face needs. But we also have inherently our Unit 4 Area of Study 2 identity encapsulated in these features. So automatically, if you decide you're going to write using contemporary examples that relate to gender, a discussion of gender, you're very likely to already be ticking off both areas of study, which is super important to implement. Another thing is that it is often very topical in the sense of the way people are speaking depending or related to their gender is really shifting. So there is a lot you can discuss, how it's shifting, how identity is reflected, how, the online mediums are potentially kind of exacerbating or weakening such predominant features. There's a lot to discuss in your essays, and you can definitely develop an idea or critique that is relevant and powerful to what your prompt is. I know if we scroll up to the VCAR list, a lot of the social and personal variation ideas, sociolex and idiolex, can be a little bit challenging and a little bit daunting to deal with, especially given their slightly more vague, contemporary, sort of on-the-fence different nature. Remember, it's not always impossible. Just use these features in the lists here for a more female gender, for a male gender down here, bearing in mind that there is some flexibility, and write a paragraph, if you like, about something that is critical and exciting, because that is what this dot point is. Unit 4, Area Study 2 is not a thing to fear. I hope this has been helpful. Please let us know in the comments below. Write questions, write comments, write other fun linguistic elements. If you'd like to see any more, please check out the EngLang Pro website. There are many, many resources to help you on your VCE English language journey. If you're a student, good luck for the rest of the year. And if you're someone that just happens to like language, good on you. Good luck, everyone, for your future studies.